afternoon, and welcome to Macmillan's first ever Lounging in the Library author program, co-sponsored by Library Journal. Before we dive in, I'll just remind you to click on the Q&A if you have any questions for our speakers. You can adjust the settings for the live captions by clicking on the CC icon if you wish. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing on our website, and we'll send a link in our follow-up email in a few days. So, who am I? I am Talia Scherer, Senior Director of Library Marketing for Macmillan, and I am thrilled, I tell you, thrilled to be joined today by 8 authors. That's right, I said 8. First up is Thrillers and Chillers, followed by a 10-minute book buzz, and then book club picks. So let's get things rolling. In Thrillers and Chillers, get ready to meet a couple vacationing on the Scottish Highlands, hoping to save their marriage. A father and daughter hiding out in the remote recesses of Appalachia. A man struggling to maintain his sanity after his wife's death. And a young woman raising her twin babies in a forest on the run from a cult-like commune. Over to you, Sofia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sofia Carapia. I would like to start this with Gus Moreno, who wrote This Thing Between Us. So Gus, I loved your book. I was especially interested in the themes of generational trauma, grief, and the supernatural. We don't want to spoil any plot points, but for the sake of the audience, how would you describe your book in a single sentence?
Yeah, first of all, hi, everyone. I'm Gus Moreno. I guess the elevator pitch of This Thing Between Us, I would say, is about a recent widower who is being haunted by an unknown supernatural entity that is inhabiting his smart speaker. And just like to branch that out a little bit, it's it's a young couple, Vera and Tiago, move into a new place, and they come from different backgrounds. And they're really, really trying to like make their life work, but they start experiencing these strange phenomenon, and it all centers around a smart speaker. And as they try to uncover the source of the supernaturalness, a horrific accident takes place, and Vera dies, and Tiago's left reeling. So he tries to escape everything that reminds him of her, but the world and this supernatural entity won't let him.
I read your book during my honeymoon and I could not put it down. I was afraid to step out of my bed. When my phone vibrated with a text message, I literally jumped. I read this book twice. Did you set out technology to make it frightening when you sat down to write this book?
You know what, I did not. So I just wanted to write a horror novel that didn't ignore modern technology. Like, I just think a lot of times you watch a movie or you read a book and you're like, why didn't they Google something? Or why didn't they, post something online? Or like, I can't imagine, like, how do you write a Halloween movie nowadays where like Michael Myers is in the house and someone's not like, Alexa, call 911. Like, I just wanted something to address like modern technology. And I think what ended up happening was just by me pointing out, like, I think how much technology is in our everyday lives, like it just came out as scary.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gus. Really quick, I'd like to introduce Kimi Cunningham Grant, who wrote The Silent Woods, Alice Feeney, who wrote Rock, Paper, Scissors, and Ripper Solomon, who wrote SORROWLAND. Just really quick introduction to you guys. Okay, so Alice Feeney wrote Rock, Paper, Scissors. This novel had so many twists and turns and multilinear points of view where each of the characters would be a little piece of the puzzle that we're trying to uncover. As a newlywed, I found this book to be hilarious and horrifying with all the twists and turns of its central relationships. Adam is a bit of a know-it-all, rude, yet funny. Amelia is extremely insecure and erotic. Robin is like twisted and intelligent. How are we able to create so many cliffhangers between all the characters and the chapters?
Firstly, hello everyone. Really lovely to be here to speak to you all. Secondly, Sophia, I'm so sorry that you read this book on your honeymoon. That's terrible because this is a very dark and twisty story about marriage. This is not what you should have been reading, but thank you for doing so. In terms of the twists and the cliffhangers, well, I originally had the idea for this story back in 2018, and I was on my way to stay at a rental property in Scotland with my husband and my dog, and we drove up to Scotland in this terrible storm, which was called the Beast from the East here. And the snow was really high, the driving conditions were really dangerous. And when we finally arrived at the property several hours later than we should have, it was in darkness, it was freezing cold, there was no power, the pipes were frozen, so there was no water, we couldn't leave, so we knew we had to just stay and make the most of it. But then just as we were about to go to bed, tired, exhausted, a little bit afraid, in this property, in a valley, in the middle of nowhere, a face appeared in the window. And in real life, that turned out to be a very kind and caring caretaker who knew that we might be in trouble and came to check that we were okay. But obviously, if I wrote about kind and caring people too often, I wouldn't write very dark and twisty thrillers. So the inspiration for the book evolved, and I didn't start writing till about 18 months later. So for me, because of the way I plot my books and think about them for a really, really long time before I write a word, by the time I start typing, all of those plot twists and cliffhangers are already there up here, but they're also on a giant board in the shed where I write, on this sort of crazy plotted out sequence for the whole book, which looks like something a madman or a murderer might come up with, but it's what I use to help me plot those twists and hopefully put all the clues in the right places for you to find.
Thank you, Alice. I'd like to introduce Kimi Cunningham Grant, who wrote The Silent Woods. This book I could not put down, not even for bathroom breaks. I was on the edge of my seat several moments throughout this book. This book was realistic and raw. I love the relationship between Finch and Cooper. How are we able to create such a natural and realistic dialogue between the two?
Hi, everybody. So good to be here. Sophia, I'm glad you found the book unputdownable. That's my favorite thing, my favorite feeling when I read a book. So I'm really glad you liked it. I spend a lot of time on dialogue. It's something that I guess it's something I really don't get right the first time around. So I generally write and then go back and read it aloud and see if it sounds how I would want characters to sound. And then I tweak and revise and read it aloud again. And so it's very iterative for me to get dialogue right. But in this book with such a small cast, I really knew I wanted to get the dialogue just right. So I'm glad that it worked out.
Thank you so much. Cooper was not a perfect person at times and not likable, yet I found myself cheering for him at the same time. How are you able to do this?
Well, Cooper does some shady stuff. Yeah, he does. But I also really wanted readers to be rooting for him and to be cheering him on. So I had to work to make that, I guess, believable. And I think people, my perspective is that nobody is really good or bad. And so we're all at any moment able to swing one way or another where we'll do things we didn't think we were capable of doing, whether that's good or bad. And so Cooper is a person who wants to be good, who maybe doesn't think of himself as good, but has also, because of his circumstances, does and continues to do things that aren't necessarily good. So I really wanted to find ways to make readers root for him, but also recognize that he's not always so predictable.
Cool. Thank you, Kimi. I just want to again skip over to Rivers, who wrote Sorrowland. How were you able to portray the history of African Americans in your book, while at the same time writing a sci-fi gothic horror that defies categorization?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Sophia, for moderating. I don't know, it's not something that I really set out to do. I didn't necessarily think about what genre a work fits in. When I'm starting the project or when I'm writing it, I knew that I wanted it to be something that had a dark tone or feel, because of the sort of the themes and the subject matter. And so out of that kind of developed a sort of Gothic feel. And also I think often when writing rooted in the South, and in this case, Texas, there's kind of that mood is often just inherently a part of it already. And I knew that I wanted to write something about transformation and not necessarily being limited by a dark history. And so I suppose that's where the kind of speculative elements came in. And I wrote about that sort of transformation or metamorphosis a little bit more literally than you would often, how it more so than how it takes place in our lives, to really sort of examine the role it plays in our lives. So yeah.
This novel depicted motherhood, conspiracy theories, surrealism, inequality, sexuality, and gender. What literary pilgrimage did you take to bring all these characters into your novel?
Gosh, it's a difficult question because in a lot of ways I'm just writing kind of not about myself, I would say, but drawing sort of from my own milieu of stuff and interests and culturally and sort of my community and stuff. So it's all kind of feels quite natural to place it in there. And so there wasn't necessarily a feeling of sort of literary pilgrimage per se, but as far as like the work that I'm drawing from, gosh, I don't know. I mean, when I talk about the book, and even when I think about even the queer themes and themes of disability as well, and gender and all of that, and when I think about the book that really sort of most showed up in this work for me, I think of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and sort of the idea of, being monstrous in the eyes of society and like being effectively made into a monster. And what that means. And I think that has resonance for so many, aspects of our lives. So that was certainly like a touchstone and something, that I wanted to think about, what does it mean to be like called a creature, and sort of stripped of your humanity.
Thank you, Rivers. And just, in the fall, I'm actually going to be reading your book for one of my book clubs just because it's like, it stood out that much to me. Loved it. Thank you. I just want to jump back to Alice. Another question that jumped out to me as like, at first I was rooting for Adam and Amelia's marriage, but then I would switch teams. I was literally like, okay, I like her, then like I hate him and everything. Did you anticipate the reader to shift allegiance between the characters?
Yes, it was quite deliberate. I always think that we're all guilty sometimes of making judgments about other people based on those first impressions, and we make a very quick judgment about who we think that person is and whether we think they're good or whether we think they're bad or whether we think we like them. And I think it's a really fun and possibly important thing to do in novels, is to show the reader that the way you feel about somebody when you first meet them isn't often who they really are when you get to know them, when you get to dig a little bit deeper. So I did want to make the reader question their own thoughts and their own judgments about these characters, and who they liked at the start might not necessarily be who they would be rooting for towards the end of the book.
Thank you. I'm just going to jump back to Gus. Gus, something that really stood out with me that I thought was the most powerful line in your book was, I already told you, Thiago, I'm from Mexico. We're all a little haunted. Can you tell us a little bit what this personally means to you?
Yeah, I think I meant it in two ways. I think one would be, I've just always felt that people from Mexico, just growing up in my life, having people who were from Mexico, I just always felt that they were either haunted by their old life or haunted by the process that it took to get to America. And I think just growing up, noticing like a lot of the adults around me just always had that like that 1,000-yard stare that I just thought was needed. That went into that sentence, but also I kind of meant it literally too, in that you know, from a lot of different Mexican families, I know there's like, you have the one family member who can like, who was chased by La Llorona one time, and you have another family member who like, oh, like they heal, they have energy, they can heal with energy, and another family member who gives you the remedies of like for everything that you're sick. Like so many stories of young children speaking with like recently deceased loved ones. It's been such a common thread in my life and in the lives of the people around me that like it just feels like sort of common. So I think that went into that that little passage.
This book has political implications. Like the teenage character and the right-wing characters using him as an anti-immigrant rhetoric. Was immigration a moving factor in writing this book?
You know, I think the immigration part came into the theme of, you know, nothing can be in and of itself. When Vera dies, Tiago just wants to stick with his grief, but his loved ones around him, those who loved Vera, seem to be kind of like metabolizing her memory. They're kind of like reducing her to a book they can buy or a phrase they can tattoo as if like that was her. And in the same sense, the aspects surrounding her death get blown up in the media, and now once again, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Now it's an immigration issue. Now it's about Americans' rights. It just played into that spinning away from like what the real truth of it was, which was his wife. His wife had passed away. I would say the biggest motivating factor for me actually was grief. I lost someone myself who was also a librarian, coincidentally. So like I used my grief as a way to just, you know, process it through the novel. And that was like the biggest motivation for me.
Thank you, Gus. I'd like to jump back over to Kimi. Kimi, PTSD and seclusion to the world were significant elements of this book. Did you write this from experience or from people that you personally know? Did you have to conduct a lot of research for this?
I did have to conduct a good bit of research. I had to learn a little bit about panic attacks. Cooper suffers from panic attacks. So I had to learn about how people manage those, both with medication and without. But also, and more importantly, my dad is a veteran. Cooper, the main character, is a veteran. And I was born after he had served, and so I didn't know him before or during his service. But my grandmother always said that he came back a different person. And so I'm very lucky that he was always a very gentle and stable presence in my life. But I know that that's not always the case. And so as I wrote about a veteran, it was really important to me to capture that experience with grace and understanding and compassion. And I have a friend who served in the War on Terror, which is where Cooper was in Afghanistan. And so I did have him read through all my sections where Cooper is having a panic attack and where he's in combat. And he was really helpful to me in coming to terms with and understanding the right words to use to capture that, I think. And honestly, I don't think I would have felt comfortable publishing the book without his blessing, where he would say like, okay, yep, I think this sounds how it is. And so, yeah, I couldn't have done it without his help.
Thank you. I don't have any children, but I can't imagine having such an intelligent, stubborn, and curious 8-year-old. Despite her warnings from her father, Finch was stubborn and at times lied to Cooper. Do you know a child like this?
I know 2 children like this so well, who live with me. No, actually, I think all kids are kind of like Finch in that sense. I will say that when I started writing this book, my oldest was 8, and now my youngest is 8, as I'm actually finalizing my very, very final draft for my editor. But I think, I'm very interested in this idea that kids at around that age, 8, they sort of have, at least hopefully, a good sense of morality, but they're also still childish because they're 8. And so I was interested in exploring what that would look like for a character to be faced with something that is in some ways perhaps bigger than the 8-year-old morality can handle, and when she's forced to sort of face that in the book. But I wanted her to be likable and lovable and believable. So I hope that we get all of that in her. She is curious, she is intelligent. And I also think 8-year-olds are getting to that point where they can kind of weigh out, like, well, if I shouldn't lie, but if I lied, then I still might get to have dessert, or whatever it is for them, that they're willing to sort of attempt to negotiate tough situations by not always being honest or doing things that they ought to do.
Thank you, Kimi. Alice, you used the condition prosopagnosia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, a health condition that was explained in the novel. Adam's ailment was depicted so well, and as a reader, I was able to sympathize with him, even though at times he was a bit of a jerk. Did this require significant research on your part?
Yes, I came across somebody with this condition a few years ago, and I became mildly obsessed with it. I think because for me, I'm almost the opposite. I tend to always remember people's faces, and I remember where I've met them, even if I've just bought a loaf of bread from the baker's. If I were to see that person again a few days later, I'll always know who they were and where I know them from. So to me, the idea of not being able to recognize faces, the idea of not being able to recognize your family, your friends, even your partner, you could walk past your partner in the street and not know that's who it was fascinating. And so I did start to do a lot of research on that, quite obsessively. I take research very seriously, to the extent that for another book, I actually arranged to go and meet someone at my local fire station, and he was very kind to me, and he sat down and he made me some tea, and I explained to him that the reason I was there was because I'd come up with this idea of a way that I could commit arson and get away with it, and I wanted to double check that I was right, that if I were to do something like this, I would get away with it, and that nobody could ever prove that it was me who started a fire. And he looked very worried, and he talked about phoning the police, and I had to explain that no, really, I was an author. And I did go and visit him once the book was published to say, look, see, I wasn't making it up. I wasn't trying to do anything illegal. It really was just part of my research. So with this book and the face blindness, I did my very best to make it as authentic as possible. And I'm always very scared of hitting send when I've finished a book, either sending it to my agent or to my editors. So I hit send, and it always takes me a little while to force myself to push the button. And imagine my surprise when my editor revealed that she has lived with face blindness for years. So I already had the best editor in the known universe, but it turned out she actually has the condition that I'd spent the last couple of years writing about. So that was a crazy, lucky and wonderful coincidence, in that Christine could then help make sure I'd got it as authentic, as I written it in as an authentic way as I possibly could, and also had some notes about experiences she had had, which I hope made the book a bit better and made it even more real, so that you could know what it was like to live with that condition every day.
Adam was able to have an on and off switch when he didn't want to deal with people. How did you go about making this complicated character accessible to the reader?
I think we've all either been an Adam at some point in our lives, or we have known an Adam. Adam is just a guy who had a dream, and he has spent years and years trying to achieve his dreams. And Adam is a screenwriter, so for him it's a very particular dream. And he's been knocked back several times, and he's collected all those rejections several times, and he's just kept picking himself up and dusting himself off. And we all like a trier, don't we? We all like someone who just keeps going just despite everything. So that's the reason why I hope that even though he has his odd and unlikable moments, I confess, I hope that readers will be on his side a little bit. And I had a dream with this particular book, and this is the only time I've ever written a book secretly hoping this, but maybe because we were in lockdown and I was watching so much TV, I really, really wanted this book to maybe be a Netflix TV show one day. So when I got an email saying that it was going to be a Netflix TV show, I was blown away and thought perhaps I just imagined the whole thing. And my only time into London for months, my only time leaving the house, was to have a meeting with the producers, and Adam was the character that they spoke about the most. And I think that's because in terms of casting, which was a very exciting conversation to have, we all felt that he had to be of a certain age, because when you're young, you think you can do anything, and you think you can be anyone, and you can achieve anything. And when you're older, sometimes life just grinds you down a little bit and tells you that you can't do this and you can't do that, and you have to follow a certain path. So part of what I wanted people to take away from this book is that if you just keep trying, if you just keep following your dreams, even if that means going on a path to a dark and scary house in the Scottish Highlands, if you just keep following your dreams and you work really hard and you believe, one day they might come true.
Thank you, Alice, and congratulations on the Netflix adaptation. That is awesome. I cannot wait to watch it and let everyone know about it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm gonna jump down to Rivers. Caneland is like a Black utopia and then a cult with far-reaching power. How were you able to place so much stunning imagery and symbolism in this, and then transitioning to the nightmarish woods, and how characters are able to live on the fringes of society?
I think what Caneland was for me was drawn both from what my hopes would be for a place, and then sort of the alternative of that, which is, or the opposite, was how those hopes get dashed. And I think in a lot of ways that can be kind of what the heart of places or communities that become cults or cult-like are about. The thing that draws people there is this idea of some sort of salvation or utopia, or some sort of way of living out their ideals, and then that gets manipulated by someone in power in ways that we're all susceptible to, not just specifically in cult spaces, but our whole lives and in every institution. So I wanted to make Caneland a place that people could see why someone would want to be there. I think too often it's when we think about cults and people who have been in cults and cult survivors and stuff like that, it's too easy to sort of separate them from us and just oh, they're crazy, and we sort of dismiss that. So I tried hard to make Caneland as terrifying as it was, and so all-powerful, also something that had beauty in it. There are orchards, and this natural beauty to it, and there's community, there's friendship, there's family. There are all of these things that I think many of us long for. And while there was all this sort of outward beauty, I think for Vern, that's the protagonist who runs away, she sort of saw under that to a lot of the really sort of terrible, controlling, violent, and just not right things that were happening there. And so while she sort of believed in the purpose of Caneland, which began as a place for sort of Black people to be free of, the terror that can be sort of living in the US, she saw that how it was being executed was not quite right. And so she left for the woods. And the woods are such an interesting, beautiful place, and also a dark, scary place. And I wanted to really draw from, I don't know, kind of fairy tales, this idea that, here lies the wolves. And this idea of losing your way, but also there's something just magical about it, about the animals, and about the trees, and about all of that. And Vern is extraordinarily a very adept survivalist, and these are skills that she's learned growing up where she did. So that makes the woods something that she can actually sort of live in, and it's not a nightmare for her, the woods themselves, but there's someone there that is hunting her, that she realizes from Caneland. So it's really kind of Caneland that's the horror, or the nightmare, and the woods, I think, represent for her freedom both from Caneland, where she grew up, but also from the outside world, which she's been raised to fear, and still fears, and sort of navigating those lines between, fantasy, happy fairy tale, and sort of scary, dark, there's someone hunting me, there's a fiend after her, or an idea of a wolf after her. It was a really lot of fun to kind of play with that imagery, and that symbolism.
What inspired you to come up with the concept of haunting? I think it was fascinating and a new concept in horror books that I've never seen.
That was haunting, you said?
Yeah, the hauntings. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that there's something, I don't remember who said it, and so I hate it when you can't bring a quote to mind, and you know how when you repeat it, you're just going to completely butcher it. So it's like, I'm not even going to try. But I love how hauntings are kind of often rooted to a specific place. So, we have obviously haunted houses and stuff, but I also think the idea of a specific kind of geography being haunted or having a haunting feel, and that's kind of, I think, one of the hearts of like Gothic fiction, like in the earlier traditional sense, you have like the English moors or something, and the fog and that kind of feel. And then with Southern Gothic, you kind of have a different take on that, but this idea of this place having some intensity to it. And so I thought, well, what if it wasn't a place but a person? What if that lived inside of you and there was no escaping it? It wasn't a matter of moving. So Vern has these hauntings basically that live inside of her mind. They've come from Caneland. Everyone experiences them there. I don't know, I think so much thriller, horror, anything adjacent to that is kind of about our psychic demons, right? And the idea of, we're against the world, but we're also against ourselves, and our own sort of traumas or whatever our sort of backstory is. And I thought it would be fun to sort of play with that in a very literal way, to bring that out. And it's kind of something thematically that's come up in my other books too. And the idea at the heart of a haunting is kind of like a memory, right? And the past coming back and forcing itself into the present. And I really wanted to play with that idea.
Thank you, Rivers. Gus, I vibed with this book culturally, from the curandera to the negative statement of not being Mexican enough. Many first-generation Latinos relate to this deeply. Do you think of the first-generation immigrants as your primary audience?
Well, I'm so happy you vibed with the book. I I didn't, not writing it, but I can definitely see like it is represented in the novel. I think it was only later that I would think like what the primary reaction I guess I wanted from the audience. And I think just I thought about it in terms of grief. If you've never suffered a great loss in your life, I wanted this novel to devastate you. I wanted the ending of Rosemary's Baby, like just that feeling of just like there is no hope, and the person you've been with for this entire movie now, like you don't even recognize that person anymore. That's really what I wanted for the general reader, and then for someone who has experienced a great loss, I wanted something that was going to be comforting in some way. A lot of the stuff I had read, kind of just to deal with my own grief, was written very eloquently and beautifully, but nothing really captured the rawness that loss really comes with. That rawness and that feeling of just transgression, I just felt was missing from that kind of literature. And I really wanted to focus on that with Tiago and Vera.
Throughout the novel, the characters ignored a lot of the evidence of the supernatural, such as cold spots, malfunctioning like speaker. Just as like a couple of examples, is it significant that these things were so easily ignored?
I think it is, because when Vera and Tiago move into their condo, they're moving in under criticism. Diane, Vera's mom, is very critical of Tiago as a spouse. So when they move into the condo, she's like, I don't know, why didn't you buy a house? Why didn't you do this? Like, she's coming at them with questions. So when they start experiencing those things, it's sort of like, you can't admit that these things are happening, because then you also have to admit that you might have made a mistake. And if you made a mistake with the house, well, maybe your relationship isn't what you think it is. So I think things start speeding up to a level that, like, maybe when the terrors are at an all-time high, they are sort of stuck with their silence, because they don't want to admit to the previous things that maybe could have stopped if they had like paid attention in the beginning.
Thank you. Thanks, Gus. So I just want to jump back to Alice really quick. The letter portion of the book was brilliant, and it gave the reader insight into the troubles and to like also all like the shambles. What inspired you to write it in this like letter form? I loved it.
Oh, thank you. I think I just really wanted to highlight the way that marriage has its ups and downs, and anyone who's been in a long-term relationship or been married knows that it isn't always easy, and it is something that you have to work on. And just because things might be bad one week, they could be brilliant the week after that, and then they might feel a bit wobbly again afterwards. And so I wanted to use this kind of diary technique, but really it's letters, where Adam's wife is writing to him on their anniversary, every anniversary, just to show the changes in their marriage, and that even though there are points in years gone by where things were unraveling, sometimes they would find their way back to each other, and you would think maybe everything's going to be okay. But it gives you a real insight, I think, into how they got to where they are now. And I loved the idea of tying those chapters and those letters to the traditional gifts that people exchange on wedding anniversaries. And I guess at that point I was thinking about my 10-year wedding anniversary and what I might give my husband. And sometimes we have exchanged traditional gifts. Sometimes one of us might have forgotten. But you have these years and these ups and downs, and every year was a marker. And although the story, I promise, is all complete fiction, when I was thinking about those traditional gifts year on year, so paper, cotton, leather, for copper, year 7 in the book, Adam actually collects pennies, 1p coins, and he collects one for each year with the year on the coin for each year that they've been together. And that definitely came from real life. And I'll share with you, my husband said I could, so it's okay. In real life, it was me. I collected the pennies, and I put all the copper pennies with all the years that we'd been together for year 7 in a little copper frame. And I always remember that one because I was still working at the BBC at that point, and I caused a massive queue in the BBC canteen because I was missing the year 2008, and I couldn't find it in any store, in any bank, everywhere I went saying, please, can I get a penny that says 2008? They didn't have it, but in the BBC canteen, they all stopped what they were doing and they all looked through the tills, and a big queue of angry journalists formed behind me, but I found the right coin. So I think we all draw from real life in certain ways, and that finds its way into the books, whether we like it or not, whether we always realize it or not. But for me, some of those chapters and the flashbacks, definitely I stole a couple of ideas for gifts from real life, and hopefully it helps explain why Adam and Amelia have ended up in the way that they are, in the place that they are, in this horrible, scary converted chapel in the Highlands, fighting for their marriage.
And thank you for sharing. That is adorable. I love like that, your penny collection that you have. That is adorable. I love it. Robin is a character I haven't talked about yet, is a misunderstood character. I would describe her as like a gloomy optimist and maybe a witch, but also a normal character. How were you able to create such a dynamic and twisted character?
Poor Robin. It's funny, isn't it? I think because the way I write, these characters live inside my head for so long, sometimes years before I actually write them, that they start to feel like family in some ways to me. And one of the very early readers of Rock, Paper, Scissors actually sent me an email saying, Robin's a bit odd, isn't she? Do you think maybe she's a bit too odd? And I felt mildly offended in that way that if the stranger does something a bit odd in the street or behaves a bit badly, you'll think of them as, well, that's definitely a baddie because look at what they're doing. But if you know, a family member or, you know, a beloved old aunt or uncle is behaving a bit badly, we all just make excuses for it. Don't make excuses because they're family and because we love them. So Robin is, I confess, a little bit of an odd character, and some of the things that she does are perhaps a little bit strange. But I think because I've spent so long living with her inside my head, I feel like I understand her completely, and I understand why she does the things she does, and why she behaves the way she does, and why she says the things she says, and the choices that she's made. So I hope that by the end of the novel, readers might also understand her a little bit and understand why she is the way she is, and also perhaps put themselves in her situation, because I think none of us really know what we're capable of until we're put in certain situations, and it's interesting what we are capable of when bad things happen.
Thank you, Alice. Kimi, who was your inspiration for Scotland? He was the character that scared me the most. I thought he had an inappropriate relationship with Finch, but it also it grasped my attention. Can you talk about the dynamic?
Yeah, I wanted readers to feel nervous about Scotland. I don't know that I had an inspiration per se, but it's sort of a conglomeration, I guess, of a couple different experiences. And one was when I was first starting this book. I had my friend and I were out with our kids. We took them out for ice cream, and we were outside, and this man sort of approached us and was just very talkative, I guess, and maybe a little more interested in the kids than he should have been. And he also commented on my friend's daughter's hair. And finally he went away, and my friend said, I just hate it when a man talks about my daughter's hair. It's just so weird, and I just hate that. And so there is a point in the book, I don't know if you remember, Sofia, but there's a point where Scotland comments on Finch's hair. So I was sort of thinking about, after the guy left, I was thinking about, you know, how was he a threat? Was he overly interested in our kids for a bad reason, or was he just like a friendly person who maybe had sort of lacked some social skills to sense that we were sort of trying to pull our kids away from him, and he just didn't notice. And so I think that interaction sort of made me start thinking about how adults, especially adult men, interact with kids, and how sometimes we can impose our lens of suspicion, I guess, over people, or are those instincts that we have as parents just good instincts, and we do need to pull our kids back. Just playing with that idea of whether someone is a threat or whether we're making bad assumptions about a person. I wanted to explore that a little bit in the book. And part of Scotland also came from, because at the time, a friend, it was more an acquaintance of ours, was a taxidermist, and he would send like skulls and different things that he had as gifts for my kids. And I think in his mind, it was like a really just a normal thing to do. And so I remember like we have this huge bear skull. I mean, it's massive. And of course, my 8-year-old was like, that thing is awesome. And I was like, do we have to keep it in the house? So, but just thinking about how you can look at gifts and how people interact with kids through certain lenses, and how that shapes the way you look at the person. Yeah.
Thank you, Kimi. Guys, I had a question. So what part of technology scares you? I would have never thought to mix paranormal and technology into a novel. Thought that was brilliant.
Oh my God, thank you so much. I would, first off, as coming as someone who was raised by TV, like I don't really have that many problems with technology. Like I'm fine with technology, but I would say maybe the fact that I'm like always reachable, and that technology is constantly insisting itself on my life, I like can't stand. I can't stand, and it's just, as someone who is an introvert, who enjoys their solace, who needs time alone, yeah, technology is constantly pressing itself on me, and that can feel at times anxious, but also like it's fear-inducing as well. Like the times where, I think I'm alone in the house and I said something that sounded like Alexa, and it turns on, and she asks something, and I'm like, like it's always something you always have to be aware of, which like you would never have thought that maybe a decade ago. So I would say the always being connected part is the thing that just really gives me the creeps.
This novel isn't necessarily about being Latino, but the culture and Spanish words in this novel reveal different Mexican experiences. How much of your own experience is represented in your novel?
I would say, I mean, the characters are like obviously way different than me or anyone else in my life, but there is a lot that comes from my own personal experience. The whole idea of just, not being Mexican enough, and just feeling like an outsider, I think like are themes that I've always written about and will probably continue to write about. So I think the whole culture part comes into that whole outsider theme, and just always feeling like in between worlds. Tiago is in between, being American and then a Mexican family, but then also being between his wife and her family, being between his solace and social media, just pressing in on his life with the information surrounding his wife's death, and with this entity, which the entity itself is between worlds. So I think that was just like a constant thing that I feel like comes from my own experience.
Thank you, Gus. So thank you guys all for joining us. This was like such a great experience. Do our panelists have any questions?
Nope, I'm good.
Anyone? Okay, cool. Does the audience have any questions?
I think we're good to go. We so appreciate our thrillers and chillers squad. You guys were wonderful. Great questions, great answers. Now get out of here. It's time for a 5-minute break. Okay,
you.
so thank you guys. Bye. Oh, did I say 5-minute? I meant 9-minute break. So stretch your legs, get a snack, but come back at 2 p.m. Eastern for a book buzz like no book buzz you've seen before, because we're in our pajamas. Get ready. We're going to be in our pajamas. Hey, welcome back, y'all. It's so nice to see you again. I hope you had a nice long break. Well, let's get to it, shall we? It's time for some book talking. Thank you, Samantha. Let's bring up that PowerPoint, shall we? Amanda, would you join us on screen, please? So as I said before, I'm Talia Scherer, and today I'm joined by my colleagues, Amanda and Samantha. We are Macmillan's Adult Library Marketing Department. Here are all the various ways that you can get in touch with us. We love hearing from you. So please reach out with any questions, concerns, virtual hugs. On July 29th, we'll be hosting YA star Stephanie Garber during our highly acclaimed and totally bananas Book Buzz Disrupt. Happy Half Hour is our weekly book talking series airing every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern, where we highlight 4 upcoming adult and YA titles. And once a month, we'll be joined by guest authors. And as you can see, on September 13th, we'll be joined by Sarah Gailey. And now, the books.
Okay, thank you, Talia. We are starting off with The Starless Crown by James Rollins. Yes, that James Rollins, now making his epic fantasy debut with the launch of a 4-book series. You've got 560 pages of speculative science, historical mystery, mythology, and pulse-pounding action. What more do you need to know? Next is Olga Daydreaming by Xochitl Gonzalez, a debut and a lead title for Flatiron Books that was won at a big auction. It follows a status-driven wedding planner. She's unlucky in love, torn between her old neighborhood and her career, as she grapples with an absent mother, her glittering career among New York's elite, and her Puerto Rican roots in the wake of Hurricane María. This is Crazy Rich Asian meets The Vanishing Half. And keep an eye out in fall 2022 as it will be coming to Hulu as a TV series. The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont is a seductive tale of love and revenge about the 11 days in 1926 when Agatha Christie disappeared and no one knows what happened, which is true, like she actually did go missing for a while. But it's really the story about Archie Christie's mistress, Nan O'Day. She's the main point of view in the book. It's gotten lots of in-house love, and Kristen Hanna called it a genuine marvel. Unmasked, My Life Solving America's Cold Cases by Paul Holes is a memoir of investigating America's toughest cold cases and the rewards and toll of a life-solving crime from the detective who found the Golden State Killer. Paul has a large following thanks to his hit podcast, The Murder Squad, 1.5 million downloads per episode. TV show The DNA of Murder with Paul Holes, and appearances on the HBO adaptation of I'll Be Gone in the Dark. His fan base is so devoted that they gave him his own hashtag #HotForHoles, and do with that what you will. Paul frequently appears on the My Favorite Murder podcast and has close ties to the Murderino world and its fans. His star continues to rise with forthcoming TV and media news soon to be announced, so keep an eye out for that.
Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins is the follow-up to the #1 library reads pick, The Wife Upstairs, a contemporary island gothic, an isolated idyllic paradise with darkness beneath. This is Agatha Christie meets the beach when 6 friends converge to experience paradise off the grid. What could possibly go wrong? For fans of Lucy Foley and Ruth Ware. A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham, this thrilling and original debut asks, what would you do if you found out that your father was a serial killer? A Flicker in the Dark is The Wife Upstairs because it is atmospheric suspense infused with Southern charm. It is Girl A because it is about a haunted family history that can't be outrun. It is Sharp Objects because there are unsolved disappearances that hit too close to home. It is The Whisper Man because a town's past crimes unnervingly echo into the present. It is All the Missing Girls because a woman's perfect future is interrupted by old wounds. Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour. LaCour's debut adult novel is a queer love story that follows 2 women on a star-crossed journey toward one another across the expanse of California. You may know Nina LaCour from her Prince Award-winning We Are Okay, among her many other celebrated YA novels. Yerba Buena is the Mortalist because it is centered on the choices siblings make as they decide their destinies. Yerba Buena is Call Me By Your Name because it exposes the vulnerability and aches between two unexpected lovers who fear they may have found the one they never would, true intimacy. Yerba Buena is Normal People because it is an elegant portrayal of two people magnetically drawn to each other amid class and power dynamics.
A Very Nice Girl by Imogen Crimp is a debut starring an ambitious young opera singer caught between devotion to her craft and an all-consuming affair with an older man. It's about a millennial woman making her own way in the world, a la Luster and Otessa Moshfegh. We won this book in a very competitive auction as part of a 2-book deal. Devil House by John Darnielle, the lead singer of Mountain Goats and the award-winning Wolf in White Van and Universal Harvester, returns with the literary horror masterpiece about an author that had one hit and now wants to take his glory back. He moves into a house where a double murder happened by teenagers, and now he's locked into a story he doesn't want to tell. Ruh-roh. A Brush with Love by Maisie Eddings. Our hero and heroine navigate their feelings and dental school. We've got a neurodiverse author and a neurodiverse main character here. And check out these advanced blurbs from rom-com heavy hitters, Helen Hong, Rosie Dannon, and Rachel Lynn Solomon. An adorable love story blends sweetness, breathless romance, and moments of striking vulnerability, says Helen Hong. Stole my heart with this laugh out loud funny, almost unbearably cute debut, and she made me care about dentistry, said Rosie Dannon. The most intoxicating slow burn I've read in ages, said Rachel Lynn Solomon. The end, my friends. And so, for the final panel of the day, let's talk book groups. Bye, Amanda. Bye, Samantha. It's been a pleasure as always. For the next 50 minutes or so, you'll hear about generations of Mexican Americans in LA and their relatable family struggles. After nearly a decade, a reprieve from an abusive kidnapper, short stories that analyze race, identity, survival, and who gets to call America home, and the dark side of ambition through the lens of female friendship and sublimated rage. Dolly, please join us and introduce your panelists.
Hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here and to introduce to you our fantastic panel. Today we have María Amparo Escandón, author of LA Weather, a hilarious and very soapy story about a year in the life of a high-powered and diverse Mexican-American family in Los Angeles. María is also the author of the best-selling Esperanza's Box of Saints. I'd also like to introduce Carolyn Ferrell, author of Miss Metropolitan. Tragedy, trauma, and mystery drive this debut novel, loosely based on the real-life story of 3 young women who were abducted and imprisoned for more than a decade in a Cleveland house. This debut is being praised by Victor Laval and Jacqueline Woodson. Also with us today is Jocelyn Nicole Johnson, author of My Monticello, a searing and timely debut story collection that explores the past and present of the United States, already earning accolades from Roxane Gay, Charles Yu, and Danielle Evans. And last but not least, we have Rachel Kapelke-Dale, author of The Ballerinas, a buzzy debut about 3 best friends in the hyper-competitive world of ballet that explores friendship, ambition, perfection, and women's rage. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Migdalia Jimenez. I am an adult services librarian at the Chicago Public Library. And we're just going to dive into the questions. So the first one I have is, the sense of place was a strong element in each of your books. Tell us about the setting you chose and how that setting helped shape your work. And I'd like to start, this is for all the authors, but I'd like to start with Carolyn. Your book, Miss Metropolitan, is inspired by a real life story that occurred in Cleveland. You chose to set your book in Queens. Tell us why you chose Queens and what that added to the story that you told.
Thank you so much, Dolly. And thank you for having me on the panel. To all of the Talia and to all of the people at Macmillan, thank you so much for organizing this event and Library Journal, of course. I chose Queens as opposed to Cleveland because I wasn't really writing a true crime novel. I wasn't writing true crime at all. I mean, I was inspired by stories that happened in the news, but I had to really work with a setting that I had some feeling for. And Queens was really interesting because I actually don't know Queens that well. I grew up on Long Island. Queens is, of course, on Long Island, but it's not really of Long Island in a certain way. It's really a part of New York City. I've always been fascinated by Queens as a place that's really expansive, but also small. So made up of a lot of neighborhoods. I mean, now we know it as a place with lots of, funky neighborhoods and really wonderful places within smaller places within a large city. But when I was thinking of the characters in Dear Miss Metropolitan, I was thinking about a place that could be expansive, but small at the same time. When I was a kid and my family would drive through Queens, to me, that was like the city, and people were out in the street and they were playing music and it was loud, and we would pass the Unisphere at Flushing Meadow Park, which I always thought of as the broken world. It's just this kind of skeleton. And there was something about it that was so engaging and alive. And I thought about that as I was writing the novel, because it is possible to be in a place that is engaging and alive and full of people and also disappear. That idea of getting lost, of being abandoned, of not having anyone to look for you, not having your community look for you or care about you, is something that I have dealt with in all my fiction. But it just struck me that this was the right place for these characters, that they were surrounded by people, but they were so separate, they were just on their own little island. So Queens, to me, it sort of harkened back to a childhood notion of Queens, but also just thinking again about a place where you can be in the thick of things, but also completely invisible, made invisible.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I think that you did a really great job, and the setting really did add a lot to that. Thank you. Rachel, if you'd like to go next, your book is set in Paris.
Yes, it is. So I think I have a very prosaic answer to this and then a more literary answer. I think just on a very basic level, when I began writing this book, I had just come back to Paris after several years away. So I had a lot of thoughts on returning to a place that you've been when you're, a young adult and coming back a bit older. And of course, Paris is an extremely writable city, with a very long literary tradition. But of course, as I went into the book, I wouldn't have kept it here if there hadn't been good reasons. And as I was writing, I started seeing these parallels between the reputation of the city, I think particularly as it's viewed in the United States, and the reputation of women in public-facing professions, dancing, but also modeling, also acting. This idea that both Paris and these types of women are incredibly beautiful, but hard to approach, a little bit aloof, all of that. And these impressions, that these reputations kind of turn both the people and the city into more of a static object than a living thing. And I thought that was so interesting as a parallel to kind of explore and to try to puncture a little bit, to go beyond the myths of Paris and beyond the myths of who a ballerina is at the same time. So, that sense of image versus reality and the ways that those grade against each other were really important to me as I was writing about Paris.
Thank you, Rachel. That's such a good point, sort of Paris being objectified in a sense in the same way that women are or tend to be. Thank you. Jocelyn, your book was set in the Virginia and DC area. Would you like to talk about that setting?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see you, and thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on this panel with these other authors. So for my book, My Monticello, place really became the connective tissues between the stories, and it kind of was the ground from which all the conflict ended up arising in these stories. I set these in my home state of Virginia because, look, I'm a native Virginian, born and bred, but my parents migrated from South Carolina right before I was born. So I had this idea of home as this kind of fragile thing, and also this idea that home could split into two things. So we would drive, 10 hours to South Carolina, maybe once a month, every month when I was little, and we'd be going home, but then we'd turn around and we'd be coming back home. And so that question of what home is kind of sits at the center of this collection, and I really was thinking about it. In My Monticello, you're going to see glimpses of the Shenandoah Valley, of Arlington, which is right outside of DC, and other places I know in Virginia, but Charlottesville, Virginia, where I've lived now for about 20 years, kind of reigns supreme in this collection. The University of Virginia, the Ridge Street neighborhood, where I live right around the corner from one of the main neighborhoods in my street, and Thomas Jefferson's plantation home, which is now a tourist site, Monticello, which is just about a 10-minute drive out my front door, along with, the parks that hold these Confederate statues, which have been this kind of focus of questions about America: who is celebrated, who is seen, who is protected, and who gets to be free. So that's how place kind of related to my work.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I think you did an excellent job of really communicating that sense of home in all the stories. Thank you. María, your book is set also in dual places, mostly in Los Angeles, but also in Mexico City. Would you like to talk about that?
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this amazing webinar. And I just feel very honored to be sharing the screen with all these amazing authors. Yes, actually, LA Weather, the novel, couldn't exist without LA. It's so LA that it's just impossible. It would be an entirely different novel. And I did base it in LA. It's set in Los Angeles because this is my city and I love it. And when I immigrated here, it just welcomed me, and I felt like I'm from here. There was a sense of belonging that was really impossible to resist. I came from Mexico, and I remember when I first got to LA, I discovered public libraries. I was 23, and I came from a country where public libraries are few and far between. In fact, I'd never seen one. So one of the first things I did was get my library card and realize that I was in a completely different world. And it was, for me, an eye-opener, and it was incredible. And since then, and fast forward 30 some years, I'm still fascinated by this city. So LA Weather, the novel, is actually a tribute to my city. The city that is like a bunny slipper to me, because, now that I'm in my pajamas, I kind of find that metaphor very appropriate, but it's a very comfortable city in many ways. And it adapts to you, and to your food. So I couldn't think of another city. It had to be. And there are several passages that take place in Mexico City, which is also the city of my birth. And I also love it. And I'm very connected to the two cities. And I just wanted to portray my city of origin as well, which are very different.
Thank you, María. Yeah, I think that I love that the world of libraries is part of your LA story. And I really, and I really liked how in your book you talk about the idea, there's this one certain Hollywood idea of LA, but that there's much more to LA than that. So
yes, of course. Very deep.
So the next question I have is for Rachel and Carolyn. Women's relationships take on a central role in some of the novels we're talking about today. Rachel, let's hear from you first on this topic. Your novel, The Ballerinas, is about three best friends in the elite world of ballet. And although there are some important male characters, your novel really concentrates on the women and features a strong Me Too plotline. Tell us about how it was to explore women's relationships so deeply.
I think that's a great question, and I think you know, this subject is so very close to my own heart, as I think, you know, the female relationships and friendships in my life have really been you know, crucial, of utmost importance. And I think in literature, a lot of the time, women's friendships are presented almost as a zero-sum game. Like, if I get the guy, you don't get the guy. And in a narrative sense, this makes sense. It increases the dramatic tension. But I was interested in kind of disturbing this a little bit and in nuancing it a little bit, because for me, that's not my experience of friendship. You know, again, if you want your friendships to take on this narrative arc for a novel, it's very convenient and it's very dramatic. And so what I did is actually, I placed these friendships in a hierarchical structure that really is zero sum, to kind of point out the extent to which this is a social construction. So they're at the Paris Opera Ballet, which was perfect for this because there are certain levels, you know, and you end up at the very top as a star. You know, you start out as kind of an intern almost, you know, an understudy. And there are limited spots at each level that the dancers audition for. And so it really is, you know, zero sum. If one dancer gets the soloist spot, another dancer doesn't get it. You know, and so by representing, you know, that the very powerful hierarchy that these women are engaging with, you know, I wanted to point out, you know, the ways in which it's constructed, and also to use it to show the ways in which the women operate around that, and in the ways in which that's actually, it's important in their lives and it determines a lot in their lives, but the ways they relate to each other are quite a bit more nuanced and go beyond that, from, you know, supportive to downright destructive. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, their relationships were definitely very nuanced, and readers are going to be intrigued by their relationships. Thank you. Carolyn, your novel, Dear Miss Metropolitan, has so many layers to it. And one of the parts that really stands out is the relationships that the women manage to form with each other despite their brutal living conditions. How did you come up with their profound relationships and quirky dialogue?
Thanks for that great question. Well, I have to say that when the three main characters in Dear Miss Metropolitan come together, they're really ready for a relationship, and they're really ready for a relationship that will provide each of them some agency. Because, you know, when I think about these characters, the place that they came from before, their homes, those were really places where they'd been abandoned. You know, they'd been abandoned by their mothers, they'd been abandoned by their communities, and then they are kidnapped, and they are, abandonment is the wrong word, but boss man, who is the man who kidnaps them and holds them captive, he has a sort of variation on the same question that their mothers and their communities ask. Their mothers are saying to these girls, have been saying, you know, why can't you be the person I want you to be? And when they get, when they're kidnapped, Boss Man pretty much says, this is the person you're going to be. You're going to be my captive. And Boss Man, to that end, comes up with a kind of language that really enslaves these women, and they use his language. But what I think is so wonderful about them is that when they finally become aware of each other in the house and then become friends, they resist that all former notions of abandonment. They want to use each other not only to survive, but to thrive, and to that end, to the end of them having some sort of agency, they have to create their own language. We're always talking about world building, and they, when I say we, I mean writers, they're really building their own world, and their world is filled with their own language. And it's a language that is freeing to them. It's a language that provides comfort. It's a language that may harken back to the language of their mothers, but it's really something that, again, kind of points to their own agency. Their language is really their kind of escape hatch. And so for me, that was really important. They make up words, they do this to, again, not just to survive, but to find a way to be in this world. So that was really important for me.
Thank you, Carolyn. And you did that beautifully. They really did create a world that helped them survive and kind of helped us as the reader as well. Thank you. I'd like to talk format now because we have many fresh and unconventional approaches in these books. María, your book, LA Weather, is composed in a calendar format, in a kind of year in the life of a family, and it's set in 2016. Talk to us about that unique format. I've never read a book like that, and why you chose that specific year to write about.
Okay, so that year was the worst year of the drought. There was a 5-year drought in Southern California, and 2016 was horrendous. And at the same time, there were so many fires, and eventually we got so much rain at the very end of the year. And so I wanted to connect actual weather events and weave them into the story. And so every fire, every Santana wind that is in the story is real. It happened. And I chose that year because that was the year I was writing the novel. So I was following all the events and including them in the novel and having the family, the Alvarados, react to them and live through them, And so it was very, it was a very dynamic process. And of course, I kept writing in 2017, 2018, but I did want to make it into a calendar, and I integrated the calendar theme into the story because the family had traditionally a calendar posted on the refrigerator where everybody posted, all their comings and goings and their appointments and whatever, vacations, but that calendar disappeared at some point, and it was some sort of metaphor for how the family became disconnected. And so this year is the year where, a lot of things happen and eventually, the calendar comes back. So I did want to write it in a calendar form, but also I got myself in trouble because it's not easy to develop a character, develop a story over a number of years if you're gonna chop it up into days. And so it was very tough. I really, halfway through it, I was like, oh my God, what did I get into? But I hope it worked out in the end.
It definitely worked out, and you made it look easy. And all the characters, there's a lot of characters, and they're all very well developed. So, and the storyline is. Thank you. Jocelyn, My Monticello is a collection of 5 brilliant short stories, followed by a captivating novella about the descendants of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. You also cleverly play around with first, second, and third person points of view. Can you tell us more about how you chose such unusual and compelling techniques?
Thank you, Dolly. So yes, the stories in the novella have kind of all these different points of view. Some of them take really unusual forms. For example, the opening inaugural story, which is called Control Negro, takes the form of a letter where this professor father is writing to his son to confess this kind of secret and pretty obscene racial experiment that he's conducting on that son. And also, by the way, I'm actually your dad kind of thing. And then there's another story called Buying a House Ahead of the Apocalypse, which I structured as a to-do list, where this mother's contemplating kind of trying to buy her first home, but at the same time, she's thinking about what she sees as signs of imminent environmental and societal collapse. So I love to-do lists, so I was thinking about that. And the novella, which something that might be more subtle is the novella, which is titled My Monticello, is kind of constructed like Thomas Jefferson's 1783 book, Notes on the State of Virginia. So I thought about the idea of just his formatting, the way he used Roman numerals, his accounts and list in that book. I have to say that I really did come to these approaches just out of each story and out of the characters' wants and desires. For example, there's a story called Something Sweet on Our Tongues that's told in this plural we voice of this group of school children. I was an elementary school art teacher for many, many years. And the reason I wanted that or the reason that you came to me was because this particular group of boys are so sensitive to one another's judgment and so desirous of one another's approval that they don't quite separate. You know, they're kind of this one entity and this one force in the story. And so I hope that the point of views and the forms that I use really do, add to the reader's engagement and to their pictures and their predicaments in the collection.
Definitely, Jocelyn. They kept me on my toes, and I know readers are going to really enjoy reading them. Thank you. So the next question is, this session is called Book Club Picks. Today, we're highlighting books that prompt conversation. How do you picture your book being read by a book club? And what kinds of discussions do you hope your book will prompt among book club readers? I'd like to start with Rachel. Do you have any ideas on how a book club might be reading your book?
Absolutely. I mean, as a writer, you want to go, however readers come to it is great. And I'm so excited to see the ways in which they open up the readings. At the same time, I'm really excited to, hear readers' thoughts on, how the book engages with the Me Too conversation. In particular, that you mentioned earlier, there is a Me Too storyline. And I think in the popular imagination, especially as it's shaken out a few years from some of those initial revelations and much later than the emergence of the initial hashtag, etc. So often we frame, I think, our understanding of that in terms of the most egregious behavior that was displayed. So everybody gets compared to Weinstein, for example, who was one of the biggest figures kind of involved, indicted by that movement. But at the same time, I think there are so many cases that on the face of it, there are so many instances, I think, that women and, that you encounter moving through the world as a woman that are far less egregious on the surface, but yet that have kind of a cumulative effect over time and that provoke this kind of underlying rage that may or may not be dealt with, and that may conflict in some ways with internalized misogyny, and with views that we thought we had about ourselves and our place in the world. So I hope that this you know, again, I'm delighted with however readers engage with this, but I guess, you know, I would be very interested to hear the ways this interacts with readers, you know, with readers' own understandings of the Me Too movement, and just of, yeah, what it is to, it sounds very sweeping, what it means to be a woman in our society, but, you know, there it is.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, I think people will really enjoy that storyline. Thank you so much. Do you have any thoughts on this, María?
Okay, so I think there are two major topics in LA weather. One of them obviously being the weather and climate change and how it is affecting us in different ways. And that is a topic that I find interesting for discussion in book clubs. The other one that I think is, for me, super important is family, and how, you know, the sisters, you know, the relationship between each of them, how they relate to each other, how they bicker, they love each other, they bully each other, you know, and they're just their behavior. They're grown women, but then they have infantile, you know, attitudes sometimes with one another because they're sisters, and that intimate relationship between them, and then the parents. It is a topic of the end of love in one way and the beginning of other kinds of loves. So in a way, the fact that the family is reunited by all the drama that they're going through and around them, you know, I think it's a very important topic these days, and more so after the pandemic, because the family dynamics in many families all over the world changed in different ways, for better or for worse. Families coming together to live under one roof. Were they reunited, or were they in trouble, or were they even in danger? You know, so there's a lot of thought going on these days about the importance of family, and how families, you know, survive, you know, while being under one roof and together. So I think that's another topic that is very interesting to discuss.
Thank you. Yes, I think the family dynamics were really entertaining and will really, but also very realistic, and will really resonate with readers. Thank you. Jocelyn, do you have an idea about how book clubs will be reading your book, what they'll be discussing?
Yeah, so it's hard for me to, I guess the starting place for me was thinking about how readers might ask themselves, or book clubs might ask each other, about some of the questions that kind of animated me while I was writing this collection. So for example, when I was writing the story Control Negro, which is the story about the professor father who's kind of struggling with racist trauma, I was asking myself questions like, what would it mean to feel unequivocally welcome in America despite race and identity? Or how is racism affecting you and those around you, not just physically, but also kind of existentially, or like philosophically? Like, what are these, you know, other ways? Or there's another story called Virginia's Not Your Home, where there's a young female protagonist who's trying to kind of either negate or escape her rural roots, in part by trying to change her name. And I was thinking about things like, where, if anywhere, do you feel completely at home? Like, where is the place you feel completely at home? And also, what do we owe one another, kind of inside and outside of our borders? And what do we even owe, like the land, or, you know, like life itself? So, and then the centerpiece of the collection really is the novella, My Monticello, which is a contemporary story set in the near future of a young Black descendant of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, who's besieged by this violent white militia, and has to flee her home. So I was thinking about things like How has history shaped you, and how do you respond to extremism and injustice when it's directed towards you, and even when it's directed towards someone else in your community? What does it look, this was a huge question for this one because the group ends up settling in Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's plantation home. And I thought, what would it look like if the history of enslaved people were treated as reverentially as the history of the founding fathers? What if those were set side by side? So those were some of the things I was thinking about, and I hope book club readers might do that too.
Yes, there's so many topics there to talk about. And I know that that question that you mentioned, what do we owe each other, is something that can bring us right to Carolyn's book, because I felt like that was asked there as well. So Carolyn?
Yeah, that really does. That's such a great question. All of those questions were fantastic, Jocelyn. They're great. I was struggling to write them all down as you were talking because they were just such wonderful questions. I would say, I've thought a lot about this because I feel that when I am invited to, if I am invited to book clubs, or I think that it's a question that's already been asked, how much did you rely on, real life events? So I think there's definitely something for people who are interested in true crime. I will probably disappoint those people when I say that, the book is really not focused on an actual event. The characters are really composites, as all characters are. They're all composites. What I would love for people to talk about, and this is kind of going back to something that Rachel mentioned earlier, the intersections of, Me Too, and Black Lives Matter for me are really, really important. The intersections of violence, of race, of gender, sexuality. When I was doing a little reading after I had finished the book, and I was doing some publicity material, and I started to look into statistics. And of course, that's always a very dark place to go. And I was looking into statistics about Black women and Black children, for example. And I came across a statistic from 2018 that of the over 230,000 children of color, or missing persons of color, rather, in this country, 170,000 were children. And I also came across another statistic that African-American girls make up 40% of the missing children in this country. So these are really awful statistics. And I'm very interested in exploring this further. I'm certainly no expert, but again, how these things come together and how, why is it that there is no collective outrage for Black women disappearing? Why, there are so many instances on, when we look at the news of unfairness and, college scandal and, privilege, et cetera, but I'm really interested in how these people, the people in my story, and I would say by extension, women of color, why they are always rendered invisible, and by extension, why they are thought of as disposable. So those would be some kind of true crime questions. But the other thing that I would love to talk about in terms of a book club, I'd love to talk a lot about form, because Dear Miss Metropolitan is, when I was going over copy edits with Retha Powers, my wonderful editor, I was like, why did I write such a complicated book? This book is so hard, but there was really no other way to write it. It's made up of letters and narratives and interviews, and, all of these things come together to tell a larger story. It was impossible to write this. When I first started the book, I started it as a straightforward conventional narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. And after I finished it, I was like, well, what's next? And I realized that the book, we're really not reading about the liberation of the girls. We're reading about their relationships. That's really what the book is about. And their relationships to the community, to each other, and that will necessarily involve including different documents and forms of communication and different technologies. So that's a question to talk about form. I'm always really, really interested in doing that.
Yeah, I think you did a fantastic job with the form, Carolyn. I think the story really is very intimately about these three women, but it's also about all of us. And so it was really important to incorporate all those different voices in there. Thank you. I'm going to ask, a couple of you have touched on this topic. What has your experience been with writing and having your book published during a global pandemic? Jocelyn, if I can start with you. One of your short stories, you actually mentioned it, it's one of my favorites. I just bought a house, so this kind of resonated with me. Buying a house ahead of the apocalypse. It really captured the bizarre feeling of going through the motions of everyday life as the world crashes around you. And I think it will resonate with many readers. How was that story informed by the experience, or was it informed by the experience of living through the pandemic?
Thank you, Dolly. So I actually have to confess, I wrote the full draft of Buying a House Ahead of the Apocalypse in the summer of 2019 before the global pandemic and the lockdown, which is just to say that many people, myself included, were already worrying kind of about the state of the world writ large well before COVID-19, both environmentally and just how we're treating and prioritizing one another. But as far as that story, the thing I was interested in is this way in which even when we're facing collapse or experiencing it, we still want all the things, right? We want an iPhone and we want the AC blasting and we want the windows down at the same time, even though we kind of know that there's a kind of suffering at the end of all that want, and there's kind of even the potential for collapse at the end of all that want. And so the story kind of is exploring that contradiction. I will say that I did complete edits during the pandemic and lockdown, and it really just reaffirmed to me this belief that we are so connected and that we need each other and that we actually need everybody. And so I hope that my stories kind of reflect some of that interconnectivity and just compel us to work in concert.
Thank you. So next, María, would you like to talk about your experience writing and getting published this book during the pandemic? I'm sorry, María, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, well, it's been quite an experience. I mean, just getting your book published normally is quite an experience. And with the pandemic, it just, not being able to meet your editor, being, everything on Zoom and getting everything prepared at a distance. And it just made it, it had like an added layer of weirdness and of course excitement and everything, but just bizarre. Yeah, but we'll see. I mean, it's coming out September 7th. So I am very curious to see how it's going to play out as far as, promotion and just getting the book out. It'll be very interesting.
Thank you, María. Rachel, would you like to tell us about your experience?
Sure. So I actually have an incredibly long runway up to my book. So the book sold in February of 2020, and then will come out in December of this year. And it's a debut, so they wanted to give it plenty of time to revise and and go through multiple edits and things like that with my wonderful editors, Sarah Canton and Sally Lotz. The pandemic for me has been, because in Paris here we've had 3 separate lockdowns, which at certain points you couldn't leave your house except for an hour a day within a kilometer. which has me Googling, kilometer and doing the math. It was a little bit like, Henry's story where, you make a wish that you have a writer's retreat. And because I live alone, then I was basically in a 3-month writer's retreat where I couldn't leave the house or do anything but write, or like a Twilight Zone episode. So it was wonderful for me in a lot of ways. And I was very lucky in that sense to just have the space to myself to be able to work through these edits and just think about writing for a long time. So, I mean, in that sense only, I think the lockdown was, that was the silver lining of the lockdown, in that, I was able to really get intensive work done every day.
Thank you. That's funny that you mentioned it as an O. Henry. Careful what you wish for, right? And yes, next, Carolyn, would you like to tell us about your experience?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like I've always been writing in a pandemic. I feel like I've just always been, I can't really say there are good things about a pandemic, but when I write, I need to be alone and quiet, and which is hard when you live with other people. But it's the pandemic, I felt, was really conducive to writing for me, at any rate. I also teach, and so that was a little more challenging, but I actually really love teaching on Zoom. So it kind of all worked out. I just will say that I have this kind of wonderful story. The last thing that I did before we all went into lockdown was give a reading in the city and in New York. And it was the beginning of March. I was part of a series of writers, and we were reading in the basement of a restaurant in Harlem. And it was a Sunday night. It was late. I don't think I even invited anyone, because everyone I know was thinking they would go to work the next day. And then suddenly things kind of went into lockdown mode. But in the audience was mine and Jocelyn's beloved editor, Retha Powers. And afterwards, we just started to talk, and she had not even started at Holt. She said, I'm going to start. And we were talking about a story collection, because I published a story collection and I've been working on short stories. And I said, well, I actually have this novel that I've been working on, and one thing led to the next. And, the book was suddenly on its way into being. And that was a really wonderful thing. And it was so nice to think, with all of the terrible things that happened at the start of the pandemic, and actually leading up to the start of the pandemic, it was nice that this, fairy godmother kind of came and, tapped her magic wand, and my book just, came into being. And it was great working with her during the pandemic. Still great working with her. But that was, it was at once magical and unreal, because we're not outside, we're not talking to other people, you're not going into offices, and yet it still happened. So, I think that, I was really lucky. I was really, fortunate that everything kind of aligned in this way. And if I can say there's a silver lining, it was definitely that the book came out, and and I'm actually enjoying the world of Zoom. I'm loving doing virtual book tour. That's great. I can't wait.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I do really like hearing people's stories. I think that's our generation's version of where were you when, the lockdown and the pandemic. So yours is really great, a nice positive one. So thank you. So we have one more question, and we're going to be, and this would be the last one. What kind of research did you do for this book? How many facts did you incorporate, and how much came from your own imagination? And actually, Jocelyn, we're going to start with you, if that's okay. You included a lot of historical information about Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson in your amazing novella, My Monticello. What informed your interest in this topic, and what kind of historical research did you do?
So I'm just going to say that I'm not a researcher. So I really set the novella within my experience, just in the sense that my protagonist, Denasia Love, lives like around the corner from where I live, where I've pushed my son in a baby stroller when he was little, and where I wave at former public school students all the time. I really relied on memories of going to Monticello with family members and how they spoke or didn't speak about slavery. And I did do, they have so much information online where you can do tours. And then I did go back up there, and it was really nice to splurge on the really good tours. As far as what got me on this topic, two things. One was August 12th, 2017 here in Charlottesville, and the whole summer of hate leading up to that, where we had the Unite the Right rally with, you know, the night before, the night that was publicized, you know, all these white nationalists, you know, rallied around Thomas Jefferson's statue on the University of Virginia, saying, you know, into the Evans and White Lives Matter. So that right there was the main one. And then a year later, we had all these events kind of focusing on this hidden history of Charlottesville. And I went to one about a tiny opera that was sung in the voice of Sally Hemings. And at the end of it, a woman stood up in the audience, and she was introduced as a descendant of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And I saw her pumping gas like the next week. And I thought, something about seeing this woman that was not unlike me, that was right here, really, really connected me to the novella and kind of got me going on that.
I love that. Thank you so much. Maria, would you like to go next? LA weather contains references to meteorology. How did you, and lots of agricultural sciences, how did you gain the knowledge to write about them in a way that was factual yet fit into the narrative so well?
Well, a lot of the story is family story and personal experience, but I did have to learn a lot about agriculture, about agriculture, particularly in California. And I also had to learn a lot about meteorology. It was very interesting. It was a lot of fun. There are just many topics. For instance, there is surrogacy, IVF, fertility, meteorology, agriculture. So I learned a lot about almonds and growing almonds in California. And all of that, the trick of research is, how do you use it so that it doesn't sound like you almost have to put a footnote, you know? So it sort of blends in the story and comes in naturally, and almost have to take it for granted, you know, in the story, not just the writer, but the characters as well. Just sort of take all this information as if it's something that it's always known. And so that was my approach. And so there's a mix of personal experience, family experience, and a lot of research on certain topics.
Yeah, and you did that very organically. Thank you, Maria. And next, Rachel, your novel is set in the elite world of the Paris Opera Ballet. What was your knowledge and or connection to the ballet, and what kind of research did you do to bring that world so alive to readers?
So I did intensive ballet training as a child up until I was about 15, which is just about the point where you get serious about, you know, making it a career and really be going to multiple classes a day. But of course, my training was with Ballet Wisconsin and then Milwaukee Ballet, so it wasn't Paris Opera Ballet, which is a very different system. And I'm sure my parents will be annoyed to hear is paid for mostly by the state rather than by individual families. So there wasn't, you know, in terms of the curriculum for the school, I used my own experience, you know, for what they were learning in classes at a particular time, because I could really shape that to what was needed in the narrative, you know, what worked for that. In terms of the actual, you know, the Paris Opera Ballet, you know, it's a really celebrated national institution here. And, you know, again, I'm in Paris, so, you know, pre-pandemic that was relatively easy to research. I think there's something like 18 documentaries since the 1980s on the school and the company. Tons of documentaries, several memoirs, not as many as in the States, but lots of dancers' memoirs and things like that. Generally, I would just, try to find, I would just mark where I needed a particular fact and then go find it later because I wanted to forefront the story. So, at certain points that had me, I pulled the blueprints of the Opera Garnier to see, where the dressing rooms are compared to this and compared to that. But it's still much faster than kind of falling down the rabbit hole of research and immersing yourself in it to kind of work as needed.
Thanks, Rachel. It was really fun to read about such an exclusive institution like that. And last, Carolyn, for Dear Miss Metropolitan, how much did you use from the real life case and how much was your own creation? Did you read any of the memoirs that the real life women wrote? And what compelled you to tell this story?
Sorry. Lori Moore, the writer Lori Moore has she once gave a really wonderful piece of advice. She said, write the story first and do the research afterwards. And that was kind of my model. I would say the events of, for example, Ariel Castro, or that case in Austria of that father locking his daughter up, that those events weren't really things that I researched, although I did actually read the memoirs of the girls who were locked up. I wasn't so much interested in telling their story, and I also, because I didn't really feel it was my place to tell their story. I mean, they're still alive and I did not want to fictionalize their lives, but I was really, as Emma Donoghue said when she was writing Room, she was really triggered by certain events. And I was really triggered by these stories of captivity, and I became very interested. I actually reread a captivity narrative in, American history because I was most interested in form, more so than getting the details right, whatever those were, So I was fascinated by the story of captivity and of liberation. But what was more important to me was, what is, and this kind of goes back to the first question of setting, what does the setting, what does the community owe, what is their responsibility to these people who have been kidnapped? And that was something that really, really possessed me. So I didn't really do any research, even the statistics I gave before, those I did after I finished the book. I was more interested in, well, how can I write a book where I include lists, an interview, newspaper articles, how can I make that cohere? So that was what I was most interested in terms of the technique and the craft of the book. But I would say that the stories of the real life people were, they were inspiring, they were triggering, but I did not keep them in the forefront of my mind. I was really concentrating on the characters I was creating. So that was the most important thing for me. I would say, in terms of, just briefly, in terms of research, the one thing that I did have to research was, because I had so many different narratives, I had to make sure all the times aligned. So I had to make sure that this person was going to a school that actually existed when they did. So that was exhausting. But in terms of the creation of the book, it just really came from my imagination.
Thank you so much for all your insight, for each one of you, for being here on this panel. I learned so much and I really enjoyed talking to all of you. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Wow, what an afternoon. Thank you to our 8 authors, our 2 moderators, and our book talking masters. And thank you especially to you, our dear audience, for tuning in. Just a reminder that the recording will be available on our website shortly. That's all, folks. Bye.